This morning, as we begin this morning, I'd like for you everybody to have a little experiment. I'd like for everybody here to take out your cell phone. Take out your cell phone. And if you have it handy, I want you to take it out and check your phone messages, not text messages, but real live phone calls. I want you to look at those. And I want you to see how many phone calls, how many recents you have on your phone. That's what it calls on mine, the recents. How many do you have that you haven't answered? Now, I want you to also look to see how many voicemails you have that you haven't listened to. How many phone calls you haven't answered, recents, and how many voicemails you haven't listened to. Now, add them together. Just add them together. Whatever number it is fine for this little experiment. I'm not going to fuss at anybody, but just how many do you have? Does anybody here have more than 5 when you add the two together? Anybody have more than 10 when you add the two together? Does anyone have more than 50? That's what mine usually looks like, is the 50. But mine had 17 this morning when I just checked there. You can do that. You know, I'm so glad about those. You can put your phone up now if you like, but up to a few weeks ago, or a few months ago, I routinely had 50 because most of the phone calls I get on that are people trying to sell me something. And I don't answer those. I'm so thankful. I prefer text. I prefer text messages. That's what most people like to do these days anyway. But I'm so thankful that you all connect with me through text messaging. It's just so much easier for me, and thank you for that. But just before I prepared this week's message, or yesterday as I was doing my actual final edits, this was my landline phone. We actually have a landline. It's not the traditional type. I run it through my computer. It's very cheap, and I use it to screen calls, sales calls. And that was yesterday's after I'd cleared it out the day before. And what was it? I had 3 new messages and 9 missed calls at that time. That can happen to us. Can you all identify with these? I think all of you can. Email. Folks, I hope you're not like this, I get sometimes 200 emails a day. Every single day, Monday through Friday, not on Saturday and Sunday, but every single day. And even though I take steps like unsubscribe and things like that to limit them, I still get hundreds of them I don't want. When I was doing my final edits on this yesterday morning, I checked, and I had 464 emails that I had not read. Now, folks, if you're saying like this, trust me, that's pretty good for me. A few weeks ago, that was up to almost 3,000. It was well over 2,000. Has anybody here ever had over 2,000 or 3,000 emails? Thankfully, it doesn't take long to get rid of them. Thankfully, it doesn't. You can get rid of them very quick, but that happens. Now, let's wrap this experiment up. I'm going to ask you a question. How many of you, when your phone goes off, do you pull it out and you look, who is it that's calling me, before you answer? Do any of you ever do that? Okay. Does anyone here ever look at your phone and say, I don't want to talk to this person? Jeannie admits that. Does anybody else? I'll admit it, that's about most of them. But how many of you look at them? We'll do that. We'll look, and sometimes if we don't want to talk, we don't answer. Or if we're busy, we don't answer, and we say, I'm going to go back and get back with them at times. You know, when I asked these questions, I wanted to have a little fun with that. But what you all told me, what you all acted or answered back, it was about what I expected. It's pretty much what I thought was going to happen. Because we live in a society that reflects our society, because electronic communication is quick. It's cheap because it's usually free. Not always, but usually it's free. But when we have that ability to tune it out, we can tune people out, can we not? It's easy to do that. Have you ever thought about this fact? God wants us to listen to Him all the time. God is always wanting us to listen to Him. And He speaks to us through His Word, the Bible. And He uses circumstances. He uses circumstances around us. However, when I hear people say, well, God told me this, and if it's not consistent with what's written in the Word, I don't believe it's God talking. I believe it's something else happening. But, you know, too many people who claim to follow God treat communication with Him the same way most of us treat an unwanted sales call or spam email. Have you ever thought about that? Many people tune God out. They might not do it even intentionally. They might say, I'm going to get back to what God said. And we don't listen quickly. We don't listen at the time. But folks, this morning I've entitled the message, Don't Send God to Your Voicemail. That's obviously a metaphor. But don't send God to your voicemail. And that's what we're going to see in Ezra chapter 2 this morning. Today we'll look at Ezra chapter 2 because the message is so powerful. But as I was reading through, and remember last week I asked you to read ahead because it's 70 verses long, and there's no way I was going to read all 70 verses. But at 70 verses, I was really struggling with a way to package this. And so I often go online to read sermons, consult sermons about the same passage, and sometimes I get ideas about how to do things. And this morning that's the case. I'm using the three main points from a minister named Jeff McNichol. I referenced him last week, and he's in a church up near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He brought the 3 points out very, very clearly. Now, the rest of the material is mine, but the three main points I'm borrowing from him. And I think that you'll see these in Ezra chapter 2. They're very easy to remember. And I want you to think about what we talk about in our own lives that we see from Ezra chapter 2. Because if you want to keep from sending God to your voicemail, if you want to really listen to God, I'm going to give you three ideas this morning from Ezra chapter 2 that you must put into work in everyday life. And the first one is to embrace your identity. Embrace your identity. I hope you remember the background of last week's message. I hope you remember what we talked about last week. We talked about Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, who had taken Jerusalem and took the Jews into captivity for 70 years. He'd been there, they'd been in captivity for 70 years. That king was Nebuchadnezzar. Did I say Belshazzar earlier? It's Nebuchadnezzar took them. But by the time that we're at now, it was Belshazzar. He was another of the king. Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem, but by this time, 70 years later, Belshazzar was the king of Babylon. But Belshazzar saw a message with writing on the wall. You remember that? And the message was that you're going to die. And that very night, he was killed in a battle, and King Cyrus of Persia took over. And Cyrus was a man who allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem if they wanted to. And that's where we pick up in Ezra chapter 2 and verse 1. It looks like just a lot of names and numbers, but there's really so much more if you look at it here. Look at Ezra chapter 2, starting in verse 1. Now these were the people of the province who came up out of the captivity of those exiles whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried captive to Babylonia. They returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to his own town. They came with Zerubbabel, Jeshua, Nehemiah, Sariah, Reliah, Mordecai, Bilshan, Mispar, Bigvai, Rehum, and Baanah. He's talking about the province. He's talking about Judah. Talking about that southern remnant of Israel. It had been a powerful and illustrious kingdom. But when Nebuchadnezzar came through there, he destroyed it and took the people off into captivity for 70 years. They were an obscure province for Persian King Cyrus. Then you go on down toward the end of the chapter. Look at Ezra chapter 2, and starting in verse 64. There were 49,897 people going back. Listen to what it says. The whole assembly together was 42,360, besides their male and female servants, of whom there were 7,337, and they had 200 male and female singers. These were people that had been in captivity for 70 years, and they had lost their identity. Their identity had been stripped from them. I've said many times here how much I love studying history. And every year about this time of year, I watch the miniseries Band of Brothers. Has anybody here ever watched that? Tyler has some of the Band of Brothers. Sandy has, a few others have. It's a tremendous, tremendous series. Very well done. It was based on the book by Stephen Ambrose, which I have read several times. And I'm fascinated by the story of the Easy Company paratroopers who were dropped behind German lines on June 6, 1944, to set up for the invasion of Europe. They were there through this Band of Brothers follows them actually from a couple of years before when they're training, all the way through the end of World War II. It's just a fascinating story, very well done by Mr. Ambrose. One scene in this that always gets to me is that the Easy Company comes upon a battalion of German soldiers. They catch them by surprise, and out comes a couple of German soldiers like this, and they're yelling, yelling, yelling. They're begging for their lives. And what they're saying is, we're Polish. Some of you may have seen that. You may know what I'm talking about. They say, we're Polish. We're not German. And if you remember, in the 4 or 5 years before that, when Germany went across Europe, they conquered most of Europe. And the people that were there, many of the younger men, were forced to join the German army. They had on the German uniforms. The Germans had indoctrinated them. But even after all that, just a few years later, these men came out, we're Polish. We're Polish. They still recognize their identity. Perhaps that in a small way illustrates what the Jews were experiencing. But they'd been in captivity for 70 years, not 4 or 5. As I mentioned last week, this was the only life many of them knew, that time of captivity. And so you had to wonder, how many of these people really still considered Jerusalem their home? It was just a small portion of the Jews. I said 49,000 and a few people. Just under 50,000 people were going. Most historians believe that there were over 1 million Jews that were in captivity in Babylon. So you take that comes out to just about 5% of the people. 42,360 people who were Jews had embraced their identity as God's people, along with supporting people to go back to Jerusalem. And that was such an important point for Ezra here. They embraced their identity of who they were. It's so important that they're in verse 2. I'm not going to read through this all. Hopefully you read it in advance. But he talks about their identities. In verses 3 through 20, he lists the various families. Then again, he goes on to more identity in verses 21 through 35. My question to you is, do you really embrace your identity of one of God's people? If you really embrace being a child of God, it's more than going around saying, I'm a Christian. It's a whole lot more. It's more than putting on your Facebook biography. It's a lot more than going on there and saying, I'm a Christian. It's such a radical grasp that you're just leaving the world behind. You see, embracing your identity isn't just making Jesus a part of your life. It's making Jesus everything in your life. Everything. It is what Peter said. Peter wrote, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellence of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Embracing your identity as one of God's people, as one of Jesus' followers, is being what Jesus called the salt of the earth and the light of the world in Matthew chapter 5. Embracing your identity means your worth isn't determined by your allegiance to a sports team or a political party. It's not determined by your job. It's not determined by your financial status. But embracing your identity is to say, I am bought by Jesus Christ. That's the greatest identity in the world. You are a child of God. Embrace that in a world that's trying to keep you away. Embrace your identity. But secondly, expand your worship. Expand your worship. Look at Ezra, chapter 2, starting in verse 36. The priests, the sons of Jediah, the house of Jeshua, the sons of Immer, the sons of Pashur, 1,247, the sons of Haram, 1,017, the Levites, the sons of Jeshua and Kadmiel, the sons of Hodaviah, 74, the singers, the sons of Asaph, 128, the sons of the gatekeepers, the sons of Shallum, the sons of Ater, the sons of Talmon, the sons of Akub, the sons of Hatita, and the sons of Shobai, in all 139. Now, if you were just taking that out of context, not really reading it, you say, why is that important? Why is that important? It's the listing of priests. And what is that showing about here? It's showing that worship was important. If you go on down to verses 43 through 54, I'm not going to read them all, but there's a listing of the temple servants that's showing again how important worship was to them. In verses 55 through 58, the descendants of Solomon's servants are listed. The common thread through all of that is worship, worshiping God. Expand your worship. You see, worship is the heartbeat of God's people. It should be what fuels us. It's coming together. It's coming together not just to have a good time. I want you to enjoy worship, but worship is so much more. It's here to glorify God. Nothing less. And we've got to take that seriously. I'm going to share a personal note with you here. I personally don't care for a lot of nonsense during a worship time together. I'll tell a joke sometimes or use humor to make a point, to illustrate a point. Folks, Jesus did that. Jesus did that in some of his parables. But I cringe when I hear people think they have to be a comedian to start a service or a sermon. I take worship very, very seriously. I put a lot of time into it. We've got to take it seriously because this is a time of coming together to glorify God. Glorifying God and nothing else. It's the most important thing in the world. What I do here as a preacher, I think it's the most important thing in the world. When everybody stands in the pulpit, he's sharing the message, the greatest message ever. Whether you're here at Mackville, Kentucky, or some New York City, or somewhere in India, or wherever, when you're sharing the message of the gospel, it's the most important job in the world, I think. We're here to glorify God, not haphazardly, but truly preparing and getting together to worship God. Folks, have you ever driven a car with a broken gas gauge? I have. Now, I'm always cognizant of how much gas I have and how many miles per gallon I'm getting. But there's been more than one time in my life when I was driving a car that the gas gauge did not work. And some people would ask me, how in the world did you always know? Did you have some kind of idea? Folks, it wasn't hard. What do you think I did? I knew how far a tank of gas would go, so I wrote it down. I wrote down when I got my gas the last time, and then about every 300 miles, regularly, I would fill up. And guess what? Even with that broken gas gauge, I never ran out of gas. I never even came close to that. I never ran out of gas. That's what expanding our worship does and more. It keeps us full. It keeps us full. It keeps our spiritual gas gauge full when we expand our worship, when we really let ourselves go. Don't get caught up in the traditions, but really worship God, and we do so regularly. We give ourselves to glorify God and let Him refuel us. If you do that often and you do that regularly, I will guarantee you that you will never get spiritually dry. You see, fully pouring ourselves out in worship is an adoration of our God, our Creator, and our Savior. Most people just aren't willing to do that. You know, I love reading from Ezra and Nehemiah because they undertook a great task in Jerusalem. But how many people did that? You say, well, almost 50,000? That's a lot of people. But what's the percentage out of 1 million? Very small. Most people don't want to take that time and take that effort to fully give yourself to the Lord. It's easy to get distracted and not put our hearts and our minds into worship. It's easy to get pulled away by other things. Too many people come together to worship as consumers, takers instead of givers. To come evaluate the preacher, come evaluate the music or whatever. But that's not why we're here. We're here to glorify God. I think about it. There are times when I leave here. Of course, I live in Lawrenceburg. If we go straight home, it takes us between 35 and 40 minutes to get from here to our house. But sometimes Stephanie and I will go to Danville on our way home to eat, say, maybe at Cattleman's. And if we go to Cattleman's and we get there and there's a long line, chances are I'm going to say, hey, let's go next door to, what's that, next door to Wings and Things or something like that, Wings and Rings, whatever it is. Or we might want to say, well, I'm going to go to Cheddar's. And if there's a lot there, well, then we'll go to Cracker Barrel or somewhere else because I don't like lines. That might not bother you. But you might like the food at one place or another. And that's okay in our society. That's okay in a capitalistic society. But you know something? Too many people treat worship the same way they treat choosing a restaurant or anything. If we like it, fine. If we don't, we'll go do something else. We apply that and then we say, what am I going to get out of it? But what should we say when we worship? What am I going to give to God? That's the number one thing. Sometimes I think we have a very narrow and limited idea of the concept of worship. We think we're limited to this building or the order we have here or anything. But let me ask you, how many of you have ever worshiped on a mountain? Man, that's awesome. Worshipped on a beach. That's awesome. Have you ever worshiped on a maternity ward? One of the greatest worship services I've ever been to was a funeral service of a great saint. And it was worship. It was pure worship that we had. Folks, let's always be people. Because you see, what does Romans chapter 12 say? Romans 12 says that we are living sacrifices. That's our spiritual worship. That means how you handle your finances is worship. How you farm, how you take care of your animals, how you take care of your land. It's a worship. It's how you're giving back to God. It's how you treat others when you worship. That is your worship, how you treat others. It means how you apply yourself at school or at work. That's worship, because everything goes back to God. Everything we do is glorifying God. And obviously how you apply yourself when we come together is our worship. As I said earlier, it's easy to get sidetracked because sin can do that. Let's make sure we don't get sidetracked and expand our worship instead. You should have a sermon note page in front of you. I'm going to take a minute here for you to do something. I'm going to stop right here. I'll come back for the last point in just a minute. But I want you to take just a minute and write down something on that page. How you can be a better worshiper. There's no right or wrong answer. It's for you. I want you to take it. I want you to take it home and hold yourself accountable. So take just a minute to do that. And I'll get back here in about a minute. So. Hold yourself accountable with that. Remind yourself every day how you can be a better worshiper. And if you need help, you want to see me about it, that's fine. I'll be glad to talk with you and help you. The last thing this morning is to express your devotion. Live in a way that you can't do without being involved in God's plan. What we're going to read here in just a minute, I absolutely love what we're going to read here in Ezra chapter 2, starting verse 59. Last week I shared with you that I had never preached from Ezra before, ever. I had read the book of Ezra, but I never really put everything together until I started studying for this series of messages. And in verse 59, starting there, it's just so cool. It's wonderful. Listen here. The following were those who came up from Tel Melah, Tel Harsha, Cherub, Adon, and Immer. Though they could not prove their fathers' houses or their descent, whether they belonged to Israel, the sons of Deliah, the sons of Tobiah, the sons of Nekoda, also the sons of the priests, the sons of Habiah, the sons of Hakaz, the sons of Barzillai, who had taken a wife from the daughters of Barzillai the Gileadite, and was called by their name. These sought their registration among those enrolled in the genealogies, but they were not found there. So they were excluded from the priesthood as unclean. The governor told them that they were not to partake of the most holy food until there should be a priest to consult Urim and Thummim. These were people who identified as Jews, but they couldn't prove it. Today it'd be somebody that said, well, I don't have a baptismal certificate, or I don't have something like that. They couldn't prove it. Yet, what was happening here? They wanted to be part of the undertaking. And that's amazing. They didn't want to wait till everything was in order. So we're told here, yeah, there were some restrictions put on them, but they couldn't become priests and all, but they were allowed to come and take part. They dove in head first. The only restrictions, I said, were they couldn't be in the priesthood because of God's laws. And they were ready and willing to go on a trip of over 500 miles for a project that had no guarantees. Folks, I absolutely love that part of the story, because here were people diving head first because of their devotion to God. They were not, in effect, sending God to their voicemail. They were listening. They were listening. They weren't going to just go back when everything was okay. They weren't waiting for the perfect funding, the perfect timing, or anything like that. They said, we want to join you. Too often we allow ourselves to get caught up in listening to the world, and we want to be realistic. A couple of weeks ago, I received something I subscribed to online, and Tom Rainer of churchanswers.com recently wrote about this. The title of the article was "The Dangers of Realistic Thinking." And he said, realism, when separated from faith, becomes limitation. It begins subtly. A church looks at its attendance and concludes, we can't grow much beyond this. It evaluates its budget and says, we can't afford to try that. It studies its community and assumes those people probably won't come here. Each statement sounds reasonable. Each one may even contain a measure of truth, but taken together, they quietly redefine what the church believes is possible. This is where realism can become something else. It becomes a ceiling. I don't want that at Mackville. I don't want that in my life. I don't want to hold back Mackville. But sometimes we tend to think about what we can see and hold ourselves back instead of realizing what God can do. Rayner went on and he said, when churches rely only on what can be calculated, they begin to trust what they can see more than the God that they cannot see. I've been there. I've done that. And it really gets back to who you are personally, because the church reflects what we are personally. But faith sees difficult tasks and says, what can God do? Not what can't we do, but what can God do? Faith refuses to allow difficult realities to define what's in store. Rayner went on to say, faith acknowledges the facts while trusting God's power. That's a beautiful picture of what the Jews did in Ezra chapter 2. They were given the opportunity to return to Jerusalem to rebuild. They could have easily stayed in Persia because, like I said, that's the only thing they knew. And most of them stayed just like did that. They stayed. But 50,000 out of 1,000,000, about 5%, listened to God. They listened to God. They didn't ignore Him. They didn't put Him off. They didn't send Him into their voicemail. They listened to God and let God work. So my question as I close this morning, what are you going to do? Are you going to listen to God's call? Are you going to embrace your identity so much that being a Christian is all you can do? Will you expand your worship to see how you can give to Him and not worry about what you can get? Will you express your devotion to allow God to lead through your uncertainties? Never hold God back. Never hold Him back. Don't push God aside. Don't send His calling to your voicemail. Listen to Him every single day. Dive in and see where He'll lead you. Let's go to the Lord in prayer.